name's Becky, and I work with the learning team at Tudor House. Unfortunately, due to the current situation, I cannot be there today, which is why I'm filming in my back garden, and you might hear a few strange noises in the background. But just before lockdown, for International Women's Day, I did a talk at Tudor House about the lives of Tudor women, and I thought I'd share with you a kind of short, cut-down version of that speech. So, I hope you're sitting comfortably, I hope you've got a tea or coffee, or maybe something stronger, and I hope you enjoy. Now, the most famous moment of the Tudor dynasty came in 1588, where English troops gathered at Tilbury to defend the country against the Spanish Armada. It was there that Elizabeth I gave one of the most famous speeches in English history. Elizabeth said, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England too, and think thou scorn that Parma or Spain or any prince of Europe should dare to invade the borders of my realm." Now, when I was younger, this speech used to confuse me, not least because the image of having a stomach of a king made me think of Henry VIII. But seriously though, I couldn't understand why Elizabeth would need to use the image, because after all, she was queen by right. However, the Tudor period was a lot more complex than that, and just because Elizabeth was queen doesn't mean to say she was accepted as a female ruler. After all, when Empress Matilda had tried to become queen after the death of her father, Henry I, in 1135, it had resulted in an 18-year-long civil war known as the Anarchy. Lady Jane Grey famously lasted only 9 days, and Elizabeth's half-sister, Mary I, when she married King Philip II of Spain, it caused upset among her supporters as well as her detractors. So what made Elizabeth so different? Elizabeth's success lay in her ability to play the dual role of a female and male monarch. Hence why at the time of the Spanish Armada she used the image of being a weak woman but a strong king. If we look at Elizabeth's most famous portrait, the Armada portrait, we see here that Elizabeth is emphasising the fact that she's a woman with the pearls, which is associated with the cult of the Virgin Mary. However, we also have the more masculine images of the English Navy defeating the Spanish Armada, as this represents one of the most important aspects of kingship, to defend the realm from outside enemies. Now, if we look at my most favourite portrait of Elizabeth, the rainbow portrait, we can see that she does something similar here. The feminine again is represented by the pearls, which symbolise peace and virginity. There is also a lot more masculine images associated with kingship. The presence of the rainbow, with the Latin motto non si sol ires, no rainbow without sun, shows that Elizabeth brought peace to the realm, not just by defending it from invaders, but by being wise and just. However, the most telling symbols are the eyes and ears that decorate this beautiful gown, as well as the jewel-encrusted snake, which demonstrates to Elizabeth's subjects that she is far from a weak and feeble woman, but that she is a monarch who is all-knowing and cunning and has eyes and ears everywhere. At a time when women were thought to have little capacity for wisdom, to quote Tudor scholar Sir Thomas Eliot, it was a time when women's bodies and personalities were understood in relation to them being the exact opposite of their male counterparts. As Sarah Mendelssohn and Patricia Crawford say in their study of women in early modern England, the man was seen as active, the woman passive. Whilst the man was seen as energetic, brave and strong, a woman was seen as gentle, weak, feeble and kind. At a time when a king, in the words of 15th century politicians John Fortescue, were to defend his realm against their external enemies by the sword and defend his people against internal wrongdoers by justice, it was thought that a woman would have no capacity to fulfil successfully either of these roles. It's important here to understand how Tudor society was structured. Tudors saw society as being structured the same as a human body. This theory had been laid out centuries earlier by the 12th century philosopher John of Salisbury. in his work Polycraticus, in which he wrote that society was structured the same as the human body, with each organ and limb representing different classes of society. The idea of this was that, like the human body, all limbs and organs need to work in harmony together for society to be a success. Now, let's look at how the body was structured. The head, of course, was the king. The king answered to no one other than God, which is why a king would wear a crown, because it would symbolise the special relationship he had with God, and also that he ruled over the body. Also, it's important to remember that because the crown was made of gold and beautiful jewels and diamonds, it would show to the outside that the country was a wealthy realm that could afford to pay soldiers to defend it. The arms, of course, were soldiers. The sides were the courtiers, who helped the king to make sure the body kept running. The feet, of course, were peasants, as John of Salisbury said. They were perpetually bound to the soil. The stomach was bankers. They helped keep the body nourished and make sure it got enough food, but not too much, otherwise it would become corrupt. Also not too little, because it would break down. The heart is Parliament, who kept the body running by passing laws, and the eyes and ears of the judges, who made sure everyone was following by the rules. Right, now in regards to the sex of the body, one could argue that it is genderless, but there is no doubt in Tudor times it would have been viewed as male. Not one of those positions, with the exception of possibly the peasants, would have been filled by a woman. In fact, it was thought incapable that a woman possessed the abilities needed to fulfil these roles. So where were women in Tudor society? The answer is they weren't really there. Tudor society was a very religious society, and its views on men, and particularly women, came from the Bible. In the Bible, Eve, the first woman, is made by God from Adam, the first man's rib. Therefore, she's not seen as equal to man, but she is kind of other. She's part of him, but not the same as him. Also, women in Tudor England were very much the daughters of Eve, and their lives were dictated by the events of Genesis, in when Adam and Eve are cursed and thrown out of Eden. As the Bible states, women were doomed to bear pain in childbirth. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Women were very much the property of their fathers and later their husbands. A woman could not make a legal contract. Her husband could sell her clothes. Her earnings were not her own. She could not sue or be sued, and any inheritance she had went to her husband. In fact, if we look at records from the time, women, unlike men, were very much defined by their relationships. If we look at this entry made by the authorities of Southampton in 1576, we see that it states, items that we present that diverse women in the town do not wear white caps, but hats, contrary to the statute, as it may appear by churchwardens, their presentment every week, as Sir Paul Eliot's wife and Robert Cross's wife. Interestingly, as it is the women who are in trouble, but they do not warrant a name, only that they are Robert Cross's wife and Paul Eliot's wife. Even when woman's husband had died, she was still cast in her relationship to him. She would have been referred to as widow of John Smith, for instance. Also of note is that one of the owners of the previous owners of Tudor House, Sir Richard Lister, only inherited Tudor House through his marriage to the previous owner's widow, Lady Isabel Lister. The reason for all of this lay in the fact that the body image of Tudor society was reflected in the Tudor household, but the difference here was the head, instead of being the monarch, was the husband or father. William Shakespeare, in his play Taming of the Shrew, has his character Catherine, the shrew, at the end, after she has been bullied into submission, declare that thine husband is my lord, thy life, thy keeper, thy head, thy sovereign. Staying with the body image of Tudor society, It is important to remember that when a monarch was forcibly removed, i.e. murdered, it was classed as treason. And this was reflected in the body image of Tudor households. If a husband killed his wife, it was classed as murder. However, if a wife killed her husband, it was classed as petite treason, and she could be faced being burnt at the stake. The reason for this lay in the fact that, like removing the head of the realm, so removing the head of the household was seen as bringing chaos to society and could, in fact, break it down. Now, it is important to remember that Tudor England was not all doom and gloom for women. Many women, especially those in the upper echelons of society, were able not only to survive, but thrive. Elizabeth Hardwicke and the lesser-known Catherine of Lorraine were able to thrive in Tudor society through a series of adventurous marriages that helped them accumulate wealth and status. If we look locally to Lady Isabel Lister, who was the wife of two of the owners of Tudor House, we see a woman who thrived despite the limits placed upon her. Married first to Sir John Daltrey and later to Sir Richard Lister, she not only managed to keep Tudor House, but had a successful trade in millstone and managed the smooth running of Tudor House with 8 servants. Isabel, like women from every class in Tudor society, may not have been head of the household body. She would have been in charge of the domestic sphere. If they had servants, like Isabel, they would have run the house through them. Whilst women of lower class would run the house themselves and be in charge of the cooking, cleaning, making of cosmetics and medicines through herbs grown in the garden. Interestingly, women were also in charge of the education of their daughters, and in many cases, the younger sons. It's also thought that Henry VIII was actually taught to read and write by his mother, Elizabeth of York, rather than tutors. Widows and merchants too could enjoy a certain amount of freedom by carrying on their husband's business and taking his place in the guilds. Judith de la Motte, along with her husband Philip, ran a successful cloth-making business in Southampton, which Judith continued after her husband's death in 1617. But for all these examples of female independence, it is important to remember that they were done on male terms, as these are women replacing their husbands to stop society breaking down. Interestingly, in Southampton in 1578, authorities were unhappy to hear that diverse young women and maidens, which keep themselves out of service and work for themselves in diverse men's houses. These are women who are making their own way in the world, but because they were not operating in society's rigid structure of working and living as part of a household, they were seen as a threat to the harmonious structure of the body and were in danger of breaking away from it completely. The Tudor period ended in 1603 with the death of Elizabeth I, and the next female ruler of England came in 1689 with Mary II. Interestingly, Mary is the only monarch in British history to rule alongside her husband, William III and II of England and Scotland. Mary is alleged to have said that she was a prince's wife and would never be other than what she should be in conjunction with him and under. It was a thought that was reportedly concurred by her husband, who was supposed to have said, "A man's wife ought to only be his wife." It would seem then, despite the success of Elizabeth I, women were still very much seen as Adam's rib. Well, I hope you enjoyed listening, and I hope to see you at Tudor House very soon. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye. Say bye-bye.
Bye-bye.